nasty, nasty work, Tiffany Hayes. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. You are pushing for physical harm and violence on Caitlin Clark because she busted your you-know-what in a basketball game that you was doing a lot of trash talking into. This is nasty work.
There is a major difference between intense basketball rivalry and behavior that crosses into territory professional sports leagues take far more seriously. Physical play, trash talk, and emotional moments on the court are all part of competition. They are regulated through league rules, officiating, and the disciplinary systems already built into professional basketball. But when a verified athlete with a public platform interacts with online content involving threats toward another player, the conversation changes completely. At that point, the issue moves beyond basketball rivalry and into an area involving league policy, public image, organizational responsibility, and potential legal scrutiny. That creates an entirely different level of accountability for the player, the team, and the league office itself. For weeks, the Indiana Fever situation has raised questions about coaching decisions, front office handling, and league oversight. Now, the focus shifts to a different situation entirely, one involving social media conduct, public perception, and the standards the WNBA chooses to enforce consistently across the league. Welcome back to WNBA Pro. Today, we are breaking down the Tiffany Hayes social media controversy in a clear, evidence-based way, what was publicly documented, why it matters institutionally, and what the league's response could reveal about disciplinary consistency moving forward. This is not about spreading threats or sensationalizing online behavior. The focus here is on the actions of a verified professional athlete in a public digital space, and the obligations that creates for the WNBA, the Golden State Valkyries organization, and the WNBA Players Association. The timing also raises an important consistency question. During the same stretch in which Stephanie White faced league discipline over comments about officiating, this new controversy emerged involving online engagement connected to threatening content. How the WNBA responds here will shape perceptions about what the league truly prioritizes when enforcing professional standards. So before opinions take over the conversation, let's establish the factual timeline first.
I cannot believe Tiffany Hayes went on social media and did this. So there was people in the social media world, and there's weirdos out there, okay, that Caitlin Clark's had a stalker already. So these things are to be taken serious, regardless if you want to or not. We watched someone get arrested for stalking this woman, okay?
The on-court events matter because they provide the competitive context that came before the social media controversy. During the Indiana Fever's 90-82 win over the Golden State Valkyries, Tiffany Hayes and Caitlin Clark were involved in several intense competitive exchanges, including physical defense and direct face-to-face interaction clearly intended to disrupt Clark's rhythm and focus. Clark answered in the way star players often do under pressure, by hitting a deep three-pointer from far beyond the arc and responding verbally in the heat of the moment. It became one of the defining highlights of the game and quickly spread across sports media and social platforms. From there, the momentum shifted noticeably. Hayes struggled to regain offensive efficiency after the exchange, and the Valkyries ultimately lost by 8 points. Those outcomes are part of the official game record, reflected directly in the box score and game footage rather than subjective interpretation. Up to this point, however, everything still fell within the normal boundaries of professional basketball competition. Emotional exchanges, physical defense, trash talk, and momentum swings are all expected parts of high-level sports. Leagues have systems in place to manage those situations through officiating, technical fouls, and post-game review when necessary. The larger institutional issue begins after the final whistle. The social media activity that followed moved the conversation away from basketball strategy and competitive emotion into questions about public conduct, professional responsibility, and how the league handles online behavior involving its players. That is where the discussion changes from a sports storyline into a broader league accountability issue.
And then another person said, listen, I got some cousins. We don't need to speak about that. We'll ride at dawn upon request. Just let me know. So this person is saying, I got some cousins that'll do physical harm and commit to violence on Caitlin Clark that has nothing to do with on the court. You're talking about harming someone violently off the floor in their regular day-to-day lives. This is nasty, regardless if this person is serious or not. As a professional, you should not be entertaining this. You should not be laughing and kikiing and ha-haing and pushing for this, Tiffany Hayes. This is nasty work. Tiffany Hayes puts "that's real" with the crying face. It's not funny.
In the hours following the game, the situation moved from competitive basketball into a far more serious public relations and institutional territory. According to widely circulated screenshots and documented social media activity, Tiffany Hayes interacted with posts in her mentions that referenced "crashing out," a slang phrase commonly associated with losing emotional control and escalating behavior beyond normal competitive intensity. On its own, that kind of language can still exist within the chaotic culture of online sports discourse. But the controversy escalated because one of the messages Hayes reportedly engaged with crossed a much more serious line. The post included language offering outside physical harm against Caitlin Clark beyond the basketball environment itself. The wording was explicit enough that it could not reasonably be interpreted as simple sports trash talk or commentary about gameplay. What transformed the situation into a major institutional issue was Hayes' documented response to that message. Rather than ignoring it, distancing herself from it, or condemning it, she reportedly replied in a way that appeared to validate or encourage the sentiment, including a reaction framed with amusement. That interaction is what shifted the discussion from emotional fan behavior into questions about the responsibilities of a verified professional athlete operating on a public platform. At that point, the conversation is no longer about hard fouls, heated exchanges, or rivalry between competitors. Professional leagues treat public engagement with threats, or statements perceived as endorsing them, very differently from ordinary competitive emotion. The issue becomes one of player conduct, league image, workplace safety, and institutional consistency in enforcement standards. For the WNBA, this creates a significant optics and accountability challenge. Once an athlete publicly interacts with content involving potential off-court harm toward another player, the league office, team organization, and players association all face pressure to determine whether the conduct violates professional standards or damages the league's public credibility.
But it's Tiffany Hayes. This is nasty work. Tiffany Hayes puts "that's real" with the crying face. It's not funny that you are pushing for this. The WNBA needs to come out and suspend her ass right away. Okay, a fine isn't enough. She needs to be fined and suspended immediately. There's no way she should.
What made this controversy escalate was not ordinary sports trash talk or emotional fan reactions. The issue, according to the documented screenshots circulating online, is that Tiffany Hayes publicly interacted with content that explicitly referenced off-court physical harm toward Caitlin Clark. Instead of rejecting the message, reporting it, or distancing herself from it, Hayes allegedly responded in a way many viewers interpreted as supportive or amused. That distinction matters because once a verified professional athlete publicly engages with threatening language directed at another player, the situation moves beyond basketball competition entirely. At that point, it becomes a question of professional conduct, league standards, organizational responsibility, and player safety. The context surrounding Clark also increases the seriousness of the discussion. She is not simply a random public figure dealing with internet criticism. There have already been widely reported concerns involving harassment, stalking behavior, and security issues connected to her growing public profile. Because of that documented history, any public interaction perceived as validating threats against her naturally receives greater scrutiny from fans, media, and league observers. Critics of Hayes argue that the response created the appearance of endorsement rather than condemnation. They also point to the reported blocking of accounts discussing the controversy as evidence that she attempted to avoid the backlash instead of directly addressing the situation publicly. Supporters, meanwhile, may argue that social media interactions can be impulsive, poorly considered, or interpreted more aggressively online than intended. Regardless of intent, this is where the institutional pressure begins. The WNBA now faces questions about consistency, enforcement standards, and whether online conduct involving perceived threats is treated differently from other forms of player behavior that have already resulted in public league discipline. That is why the conversation has expanded far beyond a single game or rivalry and turned into a broader debate about accountability, professionalism, and league response.
This is ridiculous, okay? And now what do you have? Tiffany Hayes can't handle it. And what is Tiffany Hayes doing? Tiffany Hayes is now blocking people on social media because they are calling her out for her immaturity and her lack of professionalism and the stupidity.
The Golden State Valkyries organization now faces a situation that extends beyond ordinary public relations management. Once a player's documented social media activity becomes connected to perceived threats against another athlete, the franchise inherits a clear institutional responsibility to evaluate the security, legal, and operational implications surrounding future matchups. That responsibility is especially significant with another Valkyries game still ahead on the schedule. Security planning for that environment is no longer limited to crowd control or standard game day procedures. Any controversy involving language interpreted as endorsing off-court harm immediately raises concerns that teams, league officials, arena security personnel, and legal departments are obligated to take seriously. This is not simply about online backlash or negative headlines. Professional sports organizations operate within corporate and legal structures that require them to consider player safety, fan behavior, reputational risk, and liability exposure whenever situations like this become public. Even if the league ultimately decides against formal discipline, the organization itself still has to determine how it addresses the controversy internally and publicly. The Valkyries' response, whether through silence, internal handling, or a formal statement, will itself become part of the story. League executives, sponsors, media outlets, and fans will all interpret the organization's actions as a reflection of what standards it chooses to uphold regarding player conduct and public accountability. That is why this situation has grown beyond a heated rivalry or a single viral social media exchange. It now sits at the intersection of athlete behavior, league governance, security management, and corporate responsibility, areas professional sports leagues cannot afford to ignore once they become part of the public record. Standpoint: publicly acknowledge the controversy, evaluate whether league conduct standards were violated, and establish a response consistent with the seriousness of the situation before the next Valkyries matchup. What form that response takes, whether private communication, fines, warnings, or no discipline at all, remains entirely within league discretion. But many observers believe complete silence would itself send a message. For Hayes personally, critics argue that accountability would likely require a direct public clarification or acknowledgement addressing why the interaction generated backlash in the first place. Supporters may view the situation differently, but the core issue remains the same. Once a verified